The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. The Redeemer's Coming by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. 17. In the Laboratory. We only progressed slowly in the dark aisle. Step by step, we felt our way forward, especially since the light of the oil lamp I was carrying in front of my body produced only a little light. The tunnel we followed was narrow and winding. Apparently following the building conditions of the abbey, it was, if that makes sense, within the walls. Nevertheless, I had already lost all coordination where we were, even if I tried to compare it with the publicly accessible walls of the convent. The library, that much I could tell, was long behind us, but what laid ahead of us I had no idea of. Surrounded by deadly silence, we took only careful steps, hearing only our own breathing noises while we were certain that all the friars would be immersed in a deep sleep. Finally, we reached a fork, and I followed it a few meters to the right and ended up at another secret entrance. However, I was on the inner side of it. On the wall I found a hatch, which I immediately pushed to the side. This revealed to me a peephole, and through it I saw the chapel. Apparently there was also a secret door behind the altar. Its mechanism, however, I did not find for the time being. I turned back and told Holmes where we were. Then we decided to continue following the main tunnel. It might have been another 5 minutes of carefully stepping through the narrow passage until we found another door. There was no crack or anything like it that would allow us to see what was behind it. The door was massive and also closed. I hesitated to open it, but Holmes said, "Do it, Watson. We haven't come this far to go back with unfinished business." I resolutely grabbed the handle, pushed it down, and at the same time opened the door. Behind it was a medium-sized room, a kind of vault. We had found one of the sanctuaries built during those religious wars. I stepped inside, raised the lamp, and turned it to maximum power to illuminate the surroundings to some extent. Holmes followed closely behind me. What we saw was completely unexpected. Someone had set up a kind of laboratory in this hiding place. On a large wooden table, although I had no idea how it was transported here, were laboratory utensils, including test tubes, glass tubes, 2 gas burners, mortars, atomizers, all sorts of cutlery, various vials and glasses with liquid or powdery contents, even a crank centrifuge. "Someone is doing chemical experiments here," Holmes said. "And medical," I added, because I found a second, smaller table. These included infusion syringes, thin hoses, medical preserves, the contents of which could not be seen from the outside, an operating kit and some medical tools, which were usually used more in the field of gynecology and obstetrics, although it was not exactly up to date. "Very strange," I said, referring to the lab equipment. "What might this be about?" "I know what that is, at least," Holmes said, holding a small amphorae-shaped vial with a golden clasp. "Really?" I asked. "What is this?" "I saw a picture of it in the Monastery Chronicle," Holmes explained. "In the relics, to be precise. What I hold in my hand here, my dear Watson, is nothing but the blood of Jesus Christ." "Then don't drop this precious bottle," I joked, especially since, of course, I still doubted the authenticity of the monastic relics. "Don't worry," Holmes replied. "The vial is empty. Apparently the blood was taken, but what was the purpose?" Holmes began walking up and down the lab, looking closely at the chemical and medical instruments. Eventually he stopped in front of the latter and said, "Do say, Watson, am I right in assuming that this tool would allow drawing and giving blood?" I took another look at the items at the smaller table. "Absolutely," I then confirmed. "Here you will find everything for a blood transfusion, using an intravenous injection. The same applies to the extraction." "Just like I thought," Holmes muttered, shaking the relic vial at the same time. "And the blood of Christ was inside this vial, of course, dried up long after almost 1900 years. It was dissolved with salt water and mixed in the centrifuge with drawn fresh blood at the same time the clotting was prevented. Then it was injected, again using the veins, back into the bloodstream, and with that into the body." "For heaven's sake, Holmes," I said, irritated, "you are not serious about what you're suggesting here?" "But of course I am," my friend replied. "The experiment that was carried out here was not only a chemical and medical experiment, but also a sacred experiment. Someone played God to be like the Messiah, or to create a new Messiah by means of blood transfusion. I am sure that through the veins of some person in this abbey, the blood of Jesus Christ is now partly flowing, and this man is most likely also the wanted murderer." "You mean," I continued, "Brother Emmanuel, actually only in search of his sister, has found out about these secret experiments, which are certainly forbidden by the Catholic Church, and therefore had to die?" "It's possible," Holmes replied. "However, this would be an extremely unfortunate coincidence, and, as you know, we do not believe in coincidences. Maybe there's a connection." Suddenly, behind our back, the door to the tunnel fell into its lock with a loud bang, and immediately afterwards a key was turned over from outside. "Quick, Watson!" shouted Holmes. I immediately stormed to the exit and pulled at the doorknob, but in vain. The gate was already firmly blocked from the outside and also made of solid wood. We would not be able to open it. 3 times I hammered the barricade with my right fist and demanded loudly, "Open the door immediately. Get us out." "Save yourself the trouble," Holmes said. "Whoever did this has long since disappeared through the aisle. Apparently we were persecuted, eavesdropped on, and now deliberately imprisoned. We are trapped like laboratory rats. However, the fact that the perpetrator is trying to get rid of us is a clear indication of our progress in the investigation." "Great," I replied. "Unfortunately, we will no longer have the opportunity to tell anyone about our decisive progress. And unfortunately, we didn't trust Lestrade." "You don't want to give up?" asked Holmes. "Look around you," I replied resignedly. "We are surrounded by meter-thick walls in a hidden space intended for war. No one will find us. No one will save us." "You might be right, my dear Watson," Holmes said calmly. "Then we'll probably have to save ourselves." I shook my head in despair. "It's impossible," I said. "And you know what, Holmes? That's your fault again. Do you realize that this is the 3rd time in the last few days that you have put my life in danger? You can count yourself lucky, because now you will finally succeed. Thank you." "Why is it that you always have to blow everything out of proportion?" Holmes replied. "I, for my part, take responsibility for our present certainly deplorable situation, but it is certainly not me who is to blame for the force of nature." "Oh, yes?" I insisted. "You are attracting it. You are a messenger of death." "No, not at all," Holmes defended himself. "Empirical statistics are more likely to show that you are the person who is constantly defying death. Presumably it is better to stay away from you. But don't worry, dear friend, I will stay by your side until the last breath." "How reassuring," I sighed. "And you can probably predetermine this in time, can you? How much air and thus time is left in this room before we suffocate? Or will the oil of the lamp first run out, so that we may lose our minds in absolute darkness? Go on, calculate, as a last service of your friendship." But Holmes did not react, and remained silent for a few seconds. Apparently he had no idea. "Give me the lamp," he finally said. "Maybe we have a chance." I handed him the oil lamp, and Holmes immediately removed the glass cylinder at the top, so that the flame was free. He walked around slowly, and suddenly the flame started to flicker. "Did you see that?" asked Holmes. "There's a draught. I am sorry to have to disappoint you again, but we will not suffocate here. On the one hand, and on the other hand, it means that there is a second access, no matter how small." Again Holmes walked around with the light, paying close attention to every change in the flame. As it began to flicker again, Holmes approached the wall to the right of the chemical lab table, where he thought there was an air supply. "There it is," he said, pointing to a certain spot on the wall. "A gentle breeze blows in here. This is where we have to get through. The wall there must be brittle anyway, and thinner than we thought." I looked around, searching for a suitable tool to work the rock with. In the end, my gaze fell on the centrifuge, which was ultimately a simple, small iron box. I took it in my hands and went to the wall in question. With all my strength, I rammed the edge of the device into the wall, which only slightly crumbled. Compared to the deafening noise, the destructive result had remained modest. "Make a little effort," Holmes said. "You have to strike harder." I thanked him for this extremely valuable advice and once again slammed the centrifuge into the brick wall. And indeed, some fell out and others broke apart. 4 times, 5 times, I repeated the process until a quite fresh air hit my face. Since I was quite hard at work breaking the rocks, the breeze was extremely pleasant, but I noticed a peculiar stench. I ignored this, concentrated all the remaining energy again, and pounded my battering ram violently into the wall, and in fact a small hole was created, and even a little light shone through. "Keep going," shouted Holmes. "You're almost through." Once again and again I slammed the centrifuge into the crumbling wall. The stones fell out and on top of each other, and we could already see through it. One last time I started to push and hurled the metal box straight through the hole, after which the wall collapsed completely at this point and opened a passageway for us. When the swirling dust had settled, I was the first to climb through the opening. Holmes immediately followed me. It was no small surprise when we suddenly stood in the middle of the central toilet complex of the monastery and apparently disturbed Brother Paul with his number 2. The fat cook almost fell from his seat in terror as we invaded this private moment through the collapsed wall. We shook the dust off our clothes. Holmes had to cough several times, and I rubbed my eyes. "Oh, good morning, Brother Paul," I then shouted and smiled at him kindly. "Don't mind us." But since the poor monk was already totally confused and made a disturbed face, I looked at Holmes with a serious look and rebuked Holmes to mislead Brother Paul. "Look, Holmes, you were wrong. We took the wrong turn. Our underground shortcut leads to the Redeemer's Abbey at Twickenham and not to the Sistine Chapel."